In the first broken consort video, we talked mostly about some general tips for ways of handling the different sizes of viols and recorders within a broken consort that mean that you're most likely to have a successful sounding consort. We talked a lot about the different sizes of recorder from a viol player's point of view. What do each of those instruments do and what is their purpose and their place within a consort? We talked about 3 top tips I think I gave you for applying to your broken consort to make it as satisfying as possible. We talked about a bass recorder not functioning as a bass instrument in an 8-foot pitch consort. We talked about using for both families of instruments the biggest instruments available to you. So making good use of contra, great bass recorders and using predominantly tenor and bass viols. We tried out a 4-part piece and we tried 2 different distributions of the parts within that piece and decided that either of them worked plausibly well, changing the viol and the recorder on the top 2 parts. What we didn't talk about was how I chose that piece in the first place and what makes a good choice for a broken consort piece and what makes a terrible choice. And are there some just guiding principles of where do you start if somebody says, oh, can you choose the music for this consort? There are some guiding principles. So the piece that I've chosen for today and that you've heard once already is a 5-part piece this time. It's the first letter of Thomas Tallis's setting of the Lamentations of Jeremiah. I promise to choose something slightly more upbeat and cheerful next time. But the miserable stuff is always the best, isn't it? What about it being a vocal piece then? Both pieces we've chosen so far have been vocal pieces. Is that coincidence? Well, no, it's not. Vocal pieces work really well in broken consort because for particularly the recorder family, each size of instrument equates really well to the range of a vocal part. So a soprano part fits really nicely on a tenor recorder. A bass part that is singable rather than necessarily one that could be played instrumentally on another string instrument, but a vocal range bass part fits really well on a contra and a vocal range tenor part really well on a great bass. So it suits the lineup really very conveniently. It's also good to have a piece where the parts are clearly defined in terms of range. So a piece where the parts are defined by range, if you like, and they don't cross over and there aren't necessarily 2 parts at the same pitch, particularly at the top of the consort. 2 equal parts at the top causes quite a problem for a broken consort if you're not careful. So vocal pieces fit that description really well. It doesn't mean we can't play instrumental pieces on a broken consort, but if you think about it, again, from the point of view of a viol player, think about 5-part bird viol consorts. Any of those lines would be singable, wouldn't they? They're of a shape and usually of a range that would mean if it had words, you would physically be able to sing each of those lines. Think later into the likes of Laws and Locke and even Purcell. Think about singing some of those lines and suddenly that's not such an inviting prospect, is it? And that works the same for Renaissance recorder players. Baroque recorders have a much greater range, slightly greater flexibility. Renaissance recorders very, very much fitted to the range of the human voice and suit that repertoire really very well. So you have to be careful if you're going to pick instrumental music as to how well that will fit the instruments in your consort. So I have deliberately chosen 2 vocal pieces for the things we've done so far. So what about this Tallis then? You heard it with a bass viol on the bottom, because that's the rule, isn't it? Always put a bass viol on the bottom. The part above the bottom is a baritone part, still a bass part, so that went on the contra as the higher of the 2 parts. It is quite high, this part, for the contra. There's a lot of top C's in it, For a decent contra player, that's not a problem. My contra playing skills are fairly elementary, but if you've got a sensible player, then that range of part will fit fine on one of these. I put the great bass on the middle line, the middle tenor part, and then the tenor viol on the top tenor part. And then the top vocal part, although it's the highest part, it's not really a soprano range, is it? It's a very low lying part, much more an alto voice range. So I put the bass recorder on that top part. But is that the only distribution? Well, no, of course it's not. What else could we try? Got to stick to the rule, bass viol on the bottom. Really got to keep the contra on that first bass part. So we could change the middle parts, couldn't we? We could put the tenor viol on line 3, move the recorder up to line 2, and leave the bass recorder on the top. Let's try that and see what it sounds like. That works well, doesn't it? That's a perfectly plausible distribution of instruments. I quite like the fact that at the beginning it starts with a recorder and a viol in the two parts that are in together at the beginning, and then later on, bar 30, 31, where the next pair of parts come in, the second line down and the bass, that's on another recorder viol pairing. So I think that distribution of parts works really quite well. Are there any other options? I've gone so far for, within our 5-part setup, 3 recorders and 2 viols, largely because I've got 2 viols and more recorders. But as this is an exercise in multi-tracking, there is no reason why I couldn't play one of those viols twice over. So I'm going to try a version that has a tenor viol on the top part and then leaves 2 recorders on line 2 and line 4. So we're alternating viol, recorder, viol, recorder, viol, just to see what happens.